Welcome to Present Perfect. No grammar, but plenty of history. I'm Don Congdon, your host and guide, helping you explore how the past reaches out and touches the present. This is podcast number 128. Today we take a look at a few relatively recent modern Bible translations. Several of these are in common use. Indeed, you may use one of them yourself. They reflect a number of different translation philosophies and approaches. It's important to understand what you're using, so if one of these Bibles is your favorite, pay a special attention. Virtually all of the modern English Bible translations, starting with the Revised Version, base their New Testaments on modern critical texts. As you recall from earlier podcasts, most of these emphasize the Alexandrian text-type manuscripts, which tend to be quite old. By contrast, classic translations like the KJV base their New Testaments on Byzantine text-type manuscripts, which, while not as old, are much more numerous. As I hope you remember, virtually all translations have a common Old Testament source, some form of the Masoretic text, usually supplemented by the Septuagint. Manuscript controversy, therefore, almost always centers upon the New Testament, since this is the place where most textual differences surface. For a good part of the 20th century, people divided into two camps, those who preferred a classic translation and those who felt that a modern one was more appropriate. Each of these groups divided into two additional groups, those who based their choice on the manuscript family behind the translation, and those who based it on the translation itself. Some of those in the classic camp liked the TR manuscript family, but felt that the KJV translation was becoming increasingly opaque to everyday readers. They were unhappy that all of the modern translations had shifted to the newer critical texts. What they wanted was a TR-based translation in modern English. In 1975, a translation team, spearheaded by Arthur Farstad, began work on what would eventually be called the New King James Version, or NKJV. As you may remember from podcast number 124, Farstad, along with Zane Hodges, had developed a new Greek critical text based on a wider variety of Byzantine text-type manuscripts than the TR. They called this family the majority text. The key goal behind the NKJV was a TR-based translation that was modern, yet still retained the KJV style. Opinions vary on how well they achieved this goal. The NKJV had a committee of about 130 members. It used Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia for the Old Testament, which was a departure from the original KJV. Recall that the KJV's translation committee used Bomberg's Hebrew Bible for its Old Testament. This was based on Masoretic text manuscripts but did not include the Leningrad Codex. BHS, by contrast, is based on the Leningrad Codex, which is older than the manuscripts Bomberg had available. The NKJV committee did, however, consult the Bomberg text as well as BHS. For the New Testament, the team used the TR as the primary source, but did consult other Byzantine text-type manuscripts as well. It also examined Nestle Aland for comparative purposes. Marginal notes in the translation identify textual differences, leaving it up to the reader to make a choice amongst them. Just like the original KJV, the NKJV translation leans toward the formal equivalence end of the spectrum. The committee eliminated archaic words and structures, so the result is much more readable. The NKJV's New Testament came out in 1979 and the Complete Bible in 1982. To date, there are no revisions. Let's see the NKJV's rendering of the John 1 passage that we've been using in previous podcasts. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. This translation has been quite popular overall and typically ranks in the number 3 or 4 position. For those who prefer a TR-based translation in modern English, it's pretty much the only mainstream choice available. Despite its TR basis, however, many in the KJV camp reject it for a variety of reasons. We now move on to a fairly recent translation that's another descendant of the Revised Standard Version. As you may remember from podcast number 126, the RSV caused some controversy concerning the virgin birth and was seen by some as theologically liberal. The translation we're about to examine, the English Standard Version, or ESV, attempted to correct some of these issues. In the early 1990s, Crossway Books initiated a translation project to revise the RSV, seeing a strong need for a Bible at the formal equivalence end of the translation spectrum. Crossway aimed its new translation at a scholarly audience as well as at the more serious students of the Word. In many ways, this approach went directly against dynamic equivalence translations like the NIV and borderline paraphrases like the NLT. Crossway denies that it produced the ESV as a reaction against these translations, however. A committee of 100 scholars, as well as a review board of 14, worked on the translation using the 1971 RSV New Testament and the 1952 RSV Old Testament as its starting point. Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, the Septuagint, and Nestle Aland 27 were its textual bases. The team did its best to make the result readable. The ESV does not embrace the aggressively gender-neutral language of some modern translations, but it does omit the generic masculine in some places. Overall, most consider it fairly conservative in its translation approach and word choice. The complete ESV came out in 2001 with fairly minor revisions in 2007, 2011, and 2016. Oxford University Press released a version that included the Apocrypha in 2009. Here's John 1 in the ESV. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The ESV has been very successful, usually placing in the top 5 positions. It's also very popular with publishers, many of whom have wrapped different study Bibles around it. These include a full spectrum of theological positions ranging from dispensational to reform-based. We'll discuss study Bibles more thoroughly next time. Some feel concerned that the ESV may be biased towards New Calvinist theology since Crossway publishes several prominent New Calvinist authors. For this reason, as well as the fact that several New Calvinist study Bibles use the ESV, they avoid this translation over concerns of a theological agenda. If they think about it at all, most people probably assume that the Bible is free. But actually, almost all modern Bible translations are still under copyright and are therefore not free. Their texts usually carry restrictions imposed by the publisher as to how they may be used. If you're curious about this, look on the back of the title page in a modern Bible and you'll probably see guidelines for using the text legally. Our next Bible came in response to this legal situation as well as to the technology of the early Internet age, the late 1990s. Its developer's purpose was to offer a modern translation for free and to make it available online. They called it the New English Translation, or, most appropriately, the Net Bible. The Net Bible has one of the most complicated copyrights of any modern Bible. No one is exactly sure of all its legal ramifications, but it appears that the copyright holder, the Bible Studies Foundation, truly wants it to be free and open. Developed during the late 1990s by a committee of about 20, the Net Bible uses a hybrid translation approach. The main text reflects the dynamic equivalence method, but extensive footnotes, over 60,000 of them, provide the precision of formal equivalence. Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, the Septuagint, and Nestle Aland 27 are its textual bases. The Complete Bible came out in 2001 with revisions in 2003, 2006, and 2017. It's available in a number of online and electronic formats. And once again, here's John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was fully God. The Word was with God in the beginning. All things were created by him, and apart from him not one thing was created that has been created. In him was life, and the life was the light of mankind. And the light shines on in the darkness, but the darkness has not mastered it. Our final translation is one that's recently made inroads into a number of denominations as well as some conservative groups. It originally was called the Holman Christian Standard Bible, or HCSB. Today it's known as the Christian Standard Bible, or CSB. Holman, by the way, is not an individual, but rather a publishing house. It's tied to Lifeway Christian Resources, the publishing branch of the Southern Baptists. Arthur Farstad, whom we've already met twice, started a new translation project with Holman in the 1980s. He envisioned a translation along the lines of the NKJV that would be based on Farstad and Hodge's majority text. When Farstad died, however, the project fell under other leadership and several changes resulted. Most significantly, the New Testament text changed to Nestle Aland 27 and its sister text, UBS 4. The Old Testament source text remained Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. The translation team, which had over 100 members, wanted to achieve a balance between formal and dynamic equivalence. They worked out a method called optimal equivalence, which they feel balances the precision of formal equivalence with the readability of dynamic. The translation's official website includes a scale that ranges from formal equivalence on the left to dynamic equivalence on the right. It places the CSB midway along the scale with the NKJV, KJV, ESV, and NASB moving progressively to the left. On its right in sequence is the NIV, NLT, TLB, and MSG. The HCSB's New Testament came out in 1999 and the Complete Bible in 2004. An updated version came out in 2010. One of this translation's standouts is that it renders the Tetragrammaton rather than substituting small caps Lord or God as most other translations do. As you may remember, the ASV took this approach, although most of its descendants reverted to the less controversial and offensive route. Interestingly, the second edition of the HCSB increased the number of renderings over those found in the first edition. In 2016, the HCSB morphed into the Christian Standard Bible, its current form. Besides a variety of textual changes, the CSB removed the rendered Tetragrammaton. The CSB usually falls somewhere in the middle of the top 10 English Bible translations. Although the HCSB and CSB are quite similar, there are a few differences. Listen carefully as I read our John 1 passage, first in the HCSB and then in the CSB. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him, and apart from him not one thing was created that has been created. Life was in him, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, yet the darkness did not overcome it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him, and apart from him not one thing was created that has been created. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, and yet the darkness did not overcome it. There are many more translations available, but I don't want you to get tired out by an exhaustive trek through their differences and nuances. I think I've given you a representative sample of the different translation styles, as well as addressed some of the issues surrounding Bible translation. I've also covered many of the most popular modern English translations. As I wrap up, I'll mention a handy tool that you might want to examine if you're curious about different Bible translations. It's called Bible Gateway and is available for free at BibleGateway.com. I'm not paid to endorse this site, nor do I necessarily agree with everything on it. It's simply a convenient way to access a large number of different translations and to make comparisons between them. There are other similar tools available both online and offline. In our next podcast, we're going to look at a phenomenon that started in the 16th century and continues to this day: Bible study tools. We'll examine study Bibles and the types of tools they offer to help the serious Bible student. We'll also discuss the risks of using a study Bible and the ways in which you should evaluate one. So until next time, I'm Don Congdon, and this is Present Perfect. Have a great day. Present Perfect is a copyright of Don Congdon. Music is copyright Footage Firm Incorporated. Scripture quotations are from the New American Standard Bible, which is a copyright of the Lockman Foundation.